It began like any other evening. I came home after a long day, the low hum of the porch light buzzing faintly as I pushed open the door. Inside, the usual stillness of the house greeted me, a silence that should have felt comforting but didn't. Most nights, she'd be in the living room, scrolling through her phone or flipping channels aimlessly. Tonight, though, the house had a strange energy. From upstairs, a faint, uneven shuffle broke the quiet. I took a measured step toward the staircase, my hand instinctively brushing the banister. As I reached the top, she emerged from the bedroom. Her hair was disheveled, stray locks falling across her face, and her skirt, inside out, caught my attention immediately. Her blouse clung to her awkwardly, half-buttoned, and smudged lipstick trailed down her chin. She blinked at me, her eyes glassy, and leaned against the wall, the sharp scent of alcohol hanging heavily in the air. "You're up late," she mumbled, a half-smile tugging at her lips, though it lacked any real meaning. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice firm. She waved a hand in the air as if brushing off the question and stumbled past me toward the bedroom. I followed, my jaw tightening as I noticed how uneven her steps were, the skirt's tag glaring at me from the back where it shouldn't have been. "Stop," I said, planting myself in the doorway as she fumbled with the edge of the bed. "What is this?" She turned slightly, but her eyes avoided mine. "It's nothing," she slurred, collapsing onto the mattress and kicking off her shoes clumsily. Her phone slipped from her grasp, landing near the pillow. She didn't even seem to notice, her body sagging into the bed as if all the life had drained from her. I didn't move. My eyes flicked from the phone to her crumpled figure. The faint trace of a smell I couldn't place, musky, foreign, lingered on her clothes. It wasn't mine. For a long moment, I stood there, the pieces clicking into place. The late nights, the rushed explanations, the growing distance between us. This wasn't a drunken mistake. It was something far more calculated, far deeper than she cared to admit. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of her where she lay, my hand steady. It wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about preserving this moment, a cold record of what had been hidden from me for so long. Her phone lay within reach. For a moment, I considered picking it up, but I stopped. The truth was already in front of me. This night had made sure of that. Whatever came next, it was going to change everything. What I saw next made me finally convinced of what had happened. I stood there at the edge of the bed, just staring at her. She was out cold, breathing steady, completely unaware of what she'd just blown up. Her skirt had ridden up when she flopped onto the bed. And yeah, there was nothing underneath. It was all out in the open, like some kind of sick confirmation of everything I'd been avoiding. Shocking. Sure. But more than that, it just screamed guilty. I didn't move for what felt like forever, just standing there, letting it all sink in. All those late nights, the vague excuses, the way she barely even looked at me when she'd come home late, every single red flag I'd ignored or tried to explain away. Stress. Maybe. A rough patch. Sure. But tonight, all the excuses crumbled. The truth was right there, and it was brutal. She shifted a little, mumbling something I couldn't make out, her body sinking deeper into the mattress like nothing was wrong. The room felt heavy, like I could almost feel all the lies she'd been dragging around. I glanced over her, hair a mess, makeup smeared, clothes barely holding together. The whole scene just screamed carelessness. This wasn't some slip-up. It wasn't one bad decision. This was the result of months, maybe even longer, of her choices. And now, here we were. I didn't need to dig any deeper. The way she came home, the smell of alcohol mixed with something else, something musky and not me, said more than enough. And as I stood there, I wasn't mad. I wasn't freaking out. I just felt clear. Like everything finally made sense. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of her lying there. It wasn't about being petty or trying to humiliate her. I just needed this moment locked in, something to remind myself what I'd seen. Moreover, I was curious to hear her excuses the next morning when she came to. although her excuses would no longer make sense to me. The silence in the room was overwhelming, broken only by her breathing. I didn't bother waking her up or saying anything. What was there to say? She'd already said enough with her actions. This wasn't the end of something. It was the start of something else entirely. I didn't ask for it, but I was ready for whatever came next. But what happened next completely pulled the ground out from under me. I was about to leave the room when her phone lit up on the bed. It buzzed loudly in the quiet, the screen flashing with an unknown number. I stared at it for a moment, my mind running through possibilities. It could have been anyone, but deep down, I already knew. I picked up the phone, hesitating for a moment before swiping to answer. Before saying anything, I quickly opened her phone's recording app and hit the record button. I didn't know what I'd hear, but I wanted every word preserved. "Hello," I said, my voice calm but firm. There was a short pause on the other end before a man's voice spoke up, casual and cocky. "Hey bro, who are you? Put my baby on the phone." "Your baby," I replied, my tone steady. "She's resting right now. Unconscious. What should I tell her?" The man laughed softly, almost mockingly. "Just tell her Dylan called," he said, dragging out the words like he thought they'd sting. "What do you want me to tell her, Dylan?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Tell her I'll see her soon. And tell her I miss her," he said, his tone oozing confidence. I didn't reply. Instead, I let the silence linger for a moment before ending the call. I stopped the recording, saved it, and immediately sent it to my own phone. The evidence was undeniable now. His voice, his words. I stared at her phone for a moment, then set it back on the nightstand. I turned my attention back to her. She hadn't moved, still sprawled on the bed, her skirt hiked up, oblivious to the storm she'd just unleashed. Dylan. Now he had a name, and I had everything I needed to piece this puzzle together. I stepped out of the room, closing the door quietly behind me. Sitting at the kitchen table, I replayed the recording on my own phone, listening to his smug voice as the pieces of the last few months clicked into place. Late nights, vague excuses, pulling away, all of it led here. When she finally stirred the next morning, I was in the living room, sitting on the couch and waiting. Her phone was on the coffee table, next to my own. The photos I'd taken and the recording were saved and ready, but I wasn't in a rush to bring them up. I wanted to see how she'd try to explain herself first. She shuffled into the room, looking groggy and hungover. Her hair was a tangled mess, her steps slow and unsteady. When she spotted me sitting there, her eyes darted to the phone on the table, and confusion spread across her face. "What's going on?" she mumbled, her voice hoarse. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I gestured toward the couch across from me. "Sit down," I said, my tone firm. Her brow furrowed, but she obeyed, sinking into the cushions. "What's this about?" she asked, her gaze flicking nervously between me and her phone. "Why don't we start with last night?" I said evenly. "Or should I say, Dylan?" Her face paled instantly, and for a moment, she froze. "What are you talking about?" she said, trying to sound confused, but her voice wavered. I leaned forward. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. Dylan called last night. I spoke to him. And before you even try to lie, I recorded the entire conversation." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "You want to tell me why he's calling you baby and saying he misses you?" I pressed. She looked away, her hands wringing in her lap. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Really? So you're saying you didn't spend the night sneaking around with him? You're saying the months of late nights and vague excuses mean nothing?" She bit her lip, her shoulders sagging as she avoided my gaze. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she finally said. "But it did," I shot back. "So tell me why. Why him? Why any of this?" She hesitated, then sighed deeply, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I was bored, okay? You're always so serious. You're always working or talking about work. I just Missed having fun. He made me laugh. He made me feel alive again. Bored. I repeated, incredulous. You were bored? I worked to keep this house running, to give us a life, and you were bored? You don't get it, she snapped, suddenly defensive. You never smile anymore. You never joke around. Everything is always so serious with you. I just wanted to feel something different. Different, I said, my voice rising. So you decided to sneak around like a teenager instead of talking to me? And what about last night? Walking into this house with your skirt up and nothing underneath? What kind of fun was that supposed to be? Her face flushed crimson, and she crossed her arms tightly over her chest. That's not fair, she said weakly. Not fair. I repeated, my anger boiling over. Do you have any idea what you looked like? Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to see you like that? Where's your decency? Your self-respect? Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stop. You've turned this marriage into a joke, I said harshly. You've lied to me, disrespected me, and now you want to play the victim because I called you out? She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I'm sorry, she choked out. I didn't mean for it to happen. I don't know why I did it. You did it because you didn't care enough not to, I said coldly. You didn't care about me, about us. You just cared about chasing whatever thrill you thought you were missing. Her sobs grew louder, and for a moment, I almost felt bad. But the anger and hurt ran too deep. You know what the worst part is? I said, standing up. You didn't even think enough of me to try and hide it. You just flaunted your betrayal like it didn't matter. And maybe it doesn't. To you. She looked up at me, her face red and streaked with tears, but she didn't say anything. I deserve better than this, I said simply. And I'm done pretending you care enough to fix it. Her shoulders slumped, and she sank deeper into the couch, her sobs quieter now. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to sit with the mess she'd made. Whatever came next, it was on her. This marriage wasn't something I was willing to save anymore. After she left the room, I stayed on the couch, staring at her phone sitting on the coffee table. The dark screen reflected back at me, but the face I saw wasn't one I recognized. Minutes dragged into hours, and I just sat there, letting everything churn inside me. At first, it was anger, raw and fiery. I kept thinking about how casually she had thrown away everything we built together. But anger doesn't last. It burns hot, then fades, leaving something heavier behind. Sadness settled in, thick and suffocating. This wasn't just about what she did last night or the texts and calls with Dylan. It was about everything that led us here, to this moment where nothing felt real anymore. I thought about all the times I'd ignored my gut instincts. The late nights, the vague excuses, the way she brushed me off when I asked questions. I trusted her because I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband. And she took advantage of that trust. Every lie, every excuse, every time she laughed off my concerns, it all came rushing back like knives to the chest. I couldn't stop the memories from flooding in. The day we met. The mornings we spent laughing over coffee, talking about nothing. The way we used to make plans for the future, plans that now felt like some cruel illusion. Was any of it real? Or was I just someone to fill the space until she found something more exciting? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and ran my hands over my face. It wasn't just Dylan. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the repeated choices she made, the lies she told, and the trust she broke. It was the realization that I wasn't enough for her anymore, if I ever had been. I tried to breathe through it, but every inhale felt heavy. I couldn't shake the feeling that our entire relationship had been a lie. Trust isn't something you can patch up or glue back together. Once it's gone, the whole thing collapses. I got up and started pacing the room. Part of me wanted to blame myself. Maybe I'd worked too much. Maybe I hadn't been as attentive as I should have been. But no, the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. None of that justified what she did. She could have talked to me. She could have told me how she felt. But instead, she chose to betray me. I stopped by the window, staring out at the quiet street below. The world outside looked so normal, so unshaken. It was surreal, how everything could stay the same while my world was crumbling. The sound of claws clicking against the floor pulled me back. Our dog trotted into the room, his head tilting as he looked up at me. He probably sensed something was wrong. Animals always do. I knelt down and scratched behind his ears, his fur soft under my hand. "Sorry, buddy," I muttered. "You didn't deserve this either." I stood up again, a strange calm settling over me. I couldn't stay here, not like this. Staying would mean living in a constant state of doubt, questioning her every move, wondering if she'd betray me again. It would mean giving up my self-respect for a relationship that was already broken. I grabbed a pen and a notebook from the coffee table and sat back down. I started making a list: what to pack, who to call, how to start untangling our lives. It was practical, grounding, something I could control in the middle of all this chaos. The sadness stayed. It wasn't going anywhere. This wasn't the end for me. It was the end of us, sure, but not my life. I'd figure out how to move forward, how to rebuild, how to get through this. She made hers, and now it was my turn. I glanced at her phone one last time, still sitting on the table, the screen blank. Then I pushed it aside, got up, and started packing. It was time to move on. What she did next revealed another side of her, and not the best. By the time the afternoon sun started to filter through the living room windows, I had made my decision. No more second-guessing, no more hesitating. I walked into the bedroom and grabbed my suitcase from the closet. The sound of the zipper tearing open broke the silence that had taken over the house. As I started packing, my mind stayed focused on what needed to happen next. Contacting a lawyer, finding somewhere to stay, and beginning the process of untangling our lives. This wasn't where I thought we'd end up. When I said I do, I meant it. I believed in the life we were building, in the promises we made to each other. But when trust is shattered, there's no going back. I wasn't leaving because I wanted to. It was the only choice that made sense. Staying would have destroyed whatever strength I had left. As I zipped up the suitcase, I heard her footsteps behind me. Turning, I saw her standing in the doorway, her face pale but her eyes blazing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she saw the suitcase. "You're really doing this," she said, her voice rising. I didn't answer right away, just continued packing. "Yes," I said finally, my tone calm. "I can't stay here anymore." Her face twisted, anger flaring. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away? After everything we've been through? After everything you've done?" I shot back, zipping the suitcase closed. That seemed to set her off. She stormed into the room, her voice getting louder. "You think you're so perfect? You think you've done nothing wrong? You're not some saint, you know." I stayed quiet, not rising to her bait. That only seemed to enrage her further. She turned and stormed out of the room. Moments later, I heard the sound of something smashing in the kitchen. When I walked out to see what was going on, she was standing by the sink, a shattered plate at her feet. She grabbed another one from the counter and hurled it to the floor. "You're not taking anything," she screamed. "This is my house. You'll get nothing." "Enough," I said, my voice firm but low. She grabbed a glass this time, throwing it against the wall. It shattered into pieces, the shards scattering across the floor. "You're a coward," she yelled. "You can't handle anything. You're running away because you can't stand being married to someone who isn't perfect." "Perfect," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "Is that what you think this is about? This isn't about perfection. This is about trust, respect. Things you clearly don't care about." Her face crumpled for a moment, but then the anger returned. "You think you're so much better than me," she spat. "But you're not. You're boring. You're predictable. No wonder I wanted more. The words hit me, but I didn't let it show. I stepped past her, grabbing my suitcase and heading toward the door. "This isn't over," she screamed after me. "You think you can just leave? You're not taking anything. You'll regret this." I paused at the door and turned to face her. "The only thing I regret is trusting you," I said, my voice calm again. Her face froze, and for a moment, she looked like she might break down again. But I didn't stay to see what came next. I opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind me. As I walked away from the house, suitcase in hand, the weight of everything I was leaving behind pressed heavily on me. It wasn't just the physical space or the belongings. It was the life we had shared, or at least the life I thought we had. I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me anymore. I loaded my things into my car and drove to a friend's place across town. He'd offered me his spare room, no questions asked, when I told him what had happened. The drive was quiet, the kind of silence that gives your thoughts too much room to wander. By the time I arrived, I felt drained, but at least I was out. The next few days were a blur of logistics. I made a list of everything I needed to do and started working through it. Canceling joint accounts, changing my mailing address, and disconnecting myself from the life we had built together. Each task felt like a small victory, like I was reclaiming a part of myself she had taken. Moving into the new apartment was bittersweet. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with outdated appliances and creaky floors, but it was mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over something, even if it was just this small space. I unpacked the essentials, leaving the rest in boxes I didn't have the energy to deal with. The nights were the hardest. Alone in a strange bed, I couldn't help but replay everything in my head. The good times, the bad times, the countless signs I had ignored. Every memory was a mix of sweetness and bitterness, like a meal that had gone bad halfway through. I leaned heavily on my friends during those early days. They reminded me that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't overreacting by leaving. They listened when I needed to talk and distracted me when I needed to forget. Their support was a lifeline. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I focused on work, pouring my energy into projects I had been neglecting. I picked up hobbies I had forgotten about, things I used to love before the weight of our failing marriage consumed me. I started running again, feeling the rhythm of my feet on the pavement as a kind of therapy. Reflecting on everything, I realized how much I had lost in that relationship. Not just trust, but parts of myself. I had spent so much time trying to hold us together, trying to ignore the cracks, that I hadn't noticed how much of myself I had given away. The experience taught me lessons I never wanted to learn but needed to. I learned that trust isn't something you can rebuild once it's broken. It's the foundation of a relationship, and without it, nothing else matters. I learned that love, on its own, isn't enough. It requires respect, honesty, and effort from both people. I also learned something about myself, that walking away wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a declaration of strength, a way of saying, I deserve better than this. Staying in a relationship that drains you doesn't make you noble. It just makes you lose yourself. Months passed, and the pain began to dull. It never disappeared completely, but it became a part of me, something I could carry without it controlling me. I started looking forward instead of back, focusing on the life I wanted to build. The apartment began to feel like home. I decorated it with things that made me happy, without worrying about anyone else's opinions. I filled the fridge with my favorite food, played music as loud as I wanted, and spent weekends doing whatever I felt like. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. Looking back now, I'm grateful I made the decision to leave. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. Kimberly's betrayal was a turning point, a painful reminder of what I deserve and what I'll never settle for again. For anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, my advice is this: don't let fear keep you in a place where you're not valued. Walking away is hard. It might be the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it's also freeing. You'll grieve, you'll hurt, But you'll heal. This chapter of my life is over, but it doesn't define me. It's just one part of my story, and I'm ready to see what comes next. I don't want anyone to go through this, but I would like to know your opinion on my situation. Share it in the comments below this video. Thank you for staying with me.